107 days since the Stoneman Douglas massacre. An illegitimate president, Russian operative Donald J. Trump, said of his extremely brief visit with victims and families of the more recent Santa Fe shooting, "We're going to have a little fun." This is not normal, and it's certainly not acceptable. And we'll talk about that when we come back. Welcome to the Resistance Report. I'm your host, John Michael Salvato. Yesterday, Donald Trump said we're going to have a little fun, referring to a brief visit, more of an illusion of optics really, with the Santa Fe high school shooting families and victims. Now let's be clear, Donald Trump did not by any means take the kind of genuine leadership upon himself to purposefully go to the Santa Fe high school and meet with those people. In fact, they were told that if they wanted to meet with him, they'd have to come to the airport and meet with him as he headed off to a $5,000 a plate dinner, a fundraising dinner in Houston. You see, the only thing Donald Trump cares about, and he's running scared these days, is Donald Trump. Like I said, he's running very scared. Scared of the Mueller investigation that's closing in on him. Scared of the likelihood that some of the remaining subjects and fellow targets of the investigation are going to, or have possibly already, flipped. And he's scared of the massive wave of millennials mobilized to vote out those who stand in the way of progress and safety, led by young leaders like Emma Gonzalez and David Hogg, and many others in the wake of the Parkland massacre just 107 days ago. Yes, it's only been 107 days since students and teachers and loved ones of that tight-knit community were devastated by the murderous rampage of a killer. A killer that I won't even dignify by mentioning his name. And yet, in that short time, the media coverage has all but stopped. Social media has, with the exception of those courageous young people and others like them across the country, become silent. Except for those who disgustingly started posting video clips of the killer, which is traumatizing and re-traumatizing those who lived through that horrible event and who are still only beginning to grieve, let alone to heal. So I'd like to start the broadcast today by saying, if you're watching this, please stop posting that killer's video, his name, his image, or stories about him at all. Instead, talk about the need for gun reform and better protection for our kids. Talk about the incredible work that these young people will be doing and are doing right now as they help to ensure that the criminal enterprise that has controlled our country for the past year and a half will be removed by any and every means necessary by voting them all out. And while we're talking about gun reform and reform in general, why not begin to look at one of the few good things that has come out of these past 16 months, and that is the potential for serious conversation in this country about systems and laws and traditions that are seriously flawed or broken. Things like the unchecked abuse of power that can prevent a system of real checks and balances from protecting our democracy against kleptocracies and neo-oligarchies like we're seeing now, when a ruling party becomes so morally bankrupt that it completely forsakes the rule of law and humanity in order to cover up the crimes, the acts of treason, and other criminal enterprises of a dangerous sociopath installed, not elected, by one of our most dangerous enemies. Let's talk about reforming the Constitution as any great nation of the past has done from time to time in order to become more relevant, more ethical, and honest. Let's talk about placing term limits on Congress. Let's talk about safeguards to prevent fascist regimes from installing crooked judges or impeding criminal investigations without consequence. Let's talk about better defining the president's pardon privilege so that it may only be applied to those who have been proven to have been wrongfully convicted or unfairly sentenced, not to those dangerous fellow criminals who freely and of their own accord pled guilty and who have been found guilty by due process in order to garner political favor or to attempt to obstruct justice, as we're seeing right now, by incentivizing witnesses to his own crimes to quote unquote stay strong. In other words, stay quiet. Let's talk about putting an end to terrorist organizations like the NRA and Koch Enterprises, which has held hostage congresspersons, governors, and law enforcement by buying and paying for their loyalty. In Nazi Germany, it was mandatory for citizens to salute or they'd be severely punished. Now, Herr Trump and Fraulein Mike Pence broke the law as defined by U.S. Code Title 18, Part 1, Chapter 11, Section 227, which makes it a crime for a government employee to influence the employment practices of a private entity solely for the basis on the basis of partisan political affiliation. John Cooper, chairman of the Democratic Coalition, said in a statement reported by The Wrap, Donald Trump crossed the line when he called for the firing of any NFL player who kneels during the national anthem. No president is exempt from the rule of law, and it's about time the current occupant of the Oval Office realizes that. And folks, I have to agree with him. The Democratic Coalition filed a complaint against Donald Trump with the Office of Government Ethics for calling on NFL players to fire players who kneel in protest during the national anthem. This disgusting and disgraceful Russian operative continues to whittle away at the very fiber of America's human decency, mocking the disabled, calling Latinos rapists, and NFL players sons of bitches. He's destroyed our relationships with our allies and called African nations shitholes. He's attacked our justice system. He's sexually abused women and possibly children. And he's continued a daily assault on the rule of law. And very soon, not because of a responsive or ethical congressional majority, but because of the commendable efforts of Michael Avenatti, the attorney, and courageous efforts to speak out by his beautiful client, Stormy Daniels, we're soon going to see more concrete evidence of the kind of vile, disgraceful, criminal behavior that Donald Trump and his thugs are capable of. Donald Trump has still never recognized the heroism of James Shaw Jr. because it disproves the narrative that we need guns to protect people from gun violence. He still hasn't responded to our demand to know what happened to the nearly 1,500 children stolen out of the arms of their mothers and rounded up in concentration camps where reports say many of them have been sold to child traffickers. And he's not done his job for the Americans who continue to suffer in Flint, Michigan, or in Puerto Rico. I'm utterly ashamed of what this country has become under Donald J. Trump. I'm utterly disgusted and ashamed by the friends and the family members who continue to pretend he's anything but a criminal, a childish, unskilled mobster working for the Russian mob under crime boss Vladimir Putin. Trump is a symptom of a much greater, much more pervasive disease that has eaten away at the justice and compassion in our country, even within places in which justice was once held sacred, our courtrooms. In 2014, Gregory Hill Jr. was murdered by a deputy in his own garage after he was responding to a noise complaint. No charges were filed, and today, or yesterday rather, a jury awarded Hill's family $1 for funeral expenses and another $1 for each of his 3 kids. $4 fucking is what his life was worth to them. Thankfully, we're 1 week out from the opening arguments in a case led by Senator Richard Blumenthal and others, seeking to compel Trump to obey the Constitution and to be held accountable for violations of the Foreign Emoluments Clause. He needs to be compelled to recognize and address the loss of 4,600 lives in Puerto Rico and fix the damaged infrastructure there before another disaster strikes and more lives are lost. In the Federalist Papers, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay warned us the almost unfettered pardoning power is a reminder that despite the checks and balances and institutional safeguards, it's important the presidency seldom fall to the lot of any man who is not in an eminent degree endowed with the requisite qualifications. We failed to meet that important responsibility utterly and completely by allowing Donald J. Trump to be installed by Russia into the Oval Office. The way forward demands that we be willing to get uncomfortable, to rise up as a people and consider that it may be time to discard a broken political and criminal justice system in favor of a new one, in favor of a criminal justice system and political system designed of, for, and by the people. The very people that the current system has failed. And finally, I was recently issued an ultimatum by two of my biggest consulting clients, one of whom I relied on for greater than 75%, and combined on whom I've relied for 91% of my living expenses, medical expenses, and so on every single month. If I didn't tone it down, as they said on social media, if I didn't stop producing this program, saying that they were going to expose my past experience in the adult film industry. They were going to expose my past experimentation with drugs such as cocaine and Quaaludes and MDMA in the 80s. That they were going to force those clients to fire me under the threat of those clients losing business. And I refused to back down because I took vows never to allow injustice to go on unexposed, and to do everything I could to alleviate suffering in our world. For the moment, they appear to have won the battle, but not the war. As my two clients pulled their accounts away from me, and now the 20 medications I take every single day will not be something I can afford, nor will many of my living expenses be easily covered. And I'm not asking for your pity. I do embarrassingly now have a GoFundMe page to cover my medications, and I can put that information in the information below this broadcast if anybody wants it. But that's not why I bring this up. I bring this up because I hope to inspire others. I want to state that I will not give up. I will not back down or be extorted, and neither should any of you watching this or listening to the podcast on iTunes. We will prevail. Robert Mueller has this. And I believe our last legitimate president, President Obama, likewise will not allow us to perish on his watch. And he is watching. So know that I will be your champion, that I will do everything I possibly can to protect this country from its enemies, both foreign and Republican. On behalf of the resistance and lovers of truth everywhere, I'm John Michael Salvato, and this is the Resistance Report.
Remember how the economic crash was supposed to be a wake-up call for our government? People all across the country lost their savings, their pensions, and their jobs. I'm Tom Steyer, and it turned out that the system that had benefited people like me who were well off was in fact stacked against everyone else. It's why I left my investment firm and resolved to use my savings for the public good. But here we are 9 years later, and this president and the Republican Congress are making a bad situation even worse. They won't tell you that their so-called tax reform plan is really for the wealthy and big corporations, while hurting the middle class. It blows up the deficit, and that means fewer investments in education, healthcare, and job creation. It's up to all of us to stand up to this president, not just for impeachable offenses, but also to demand a country where everyone has a real chance to succeed. Join us. Your voice matters.